Warning, the video you're about to see has a lot of spoilers about the game, the Callisto Protocol. There's also lots of violence, gore, and flashing lights, so just be careful. Also, as a reminder, I did receive this game as a early embargo process, just like the reviewers did in the press, so I did not get paid to play this game. The views in this video are mine and mine alone. Enjoy. In 2008, Visceral Games revolutionized horror titles with a brand new IP known as Dead Space on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The setting, sound design, and horrifying monsters catapulted it into all-timer status. I've been chasing the high of that particular horror game ever since. A silent protagonist that we grew to love, Isaac and his love for his girlfriend justified our want and need to see things through to the end of the first game. The game was such an amazing success that Dead Space 2 was greenlit. Isaac was then given a proper voice actor with lines and dialogue, and a prequel on the Nintendo Wii as an on-rail shooter was already well on its way. Unfortunately, despite the success of Dead Space 1 and 2, Visceral Games missed their projections, and soon to follow was the exit of a lot of the core team at the company. The franchise became a big sinkhole of cash for EA, and a hard pivot was needed for Dead Space 3 to have monetization systems put in place in hopes of making back the various budgets. What we got was a severely disappointing experience that changed a lot of the core identity of the Dead Space franchise. Rumor upon rumor, year after year, the world sat around and hoped for Dead Space to make a return in some fashion. Fast forward to now, and the Callisto Protocol, directed by Dead Space co-creator Glenn Schofield, is here. There is a lot riding on this title. A AAA-looking game from a significantly smaller studio, with technology that rivals so many other corporations. Call it a spiritual successor, call it a secret sequel, call it whatever you want. The Callisto Protocol aims to create and define its own new destiny that will rival that of where it came from.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another brand new episode of The Completionist, where we don't just beat the games, we complete them. Welcome to the last month of the year, December, which means that this month is officially going to be called Game of the Year month / release all the games by the end of the year to crunch throughout the holidays month. Now look, now that I'm more fully focused on just completionist videos, it means that I have to experience my own form of crunch all month long, and I apologize if I look and sound tired, because I've had very little sleep lately, considering that I have been trying my best to tackle the Callisto Protocol as soon as possible. The Callisto Protocol being a brand new horror game with scary sci-fi vibes that I've been trying my best to knock out. To be clear, this video is from the perspective of someone who went a little crazy during this particular completion experience, ultimately giving me this thought right here. I think the Callisto Protocol is an exceptionally okay game, and that means that I'm going to be giving it my completionist rating of play it. Now, I'm sharing this with you right now for a few reasons. One, I got great feedback from you all at home about my Sonic Frontiers video, and how telling you the rating at the top of the video helped with your expectations and set the bar, which I really enjoyed. Two, the Callisto Protocol does something that I do not want to do. Waste your time. Which, let's be honest, I've done too much already, and the TRT, the total runtime of this video, will give you an idea of how much time is to be wasted. So, buckle up. This is the journey of how I completed the Callisto Protocol on PlayStation 5.
Yes! All glory goes to the winner!
As a diehard fan of Dead Space 1 and 2, the Callisto Protocol has been on my radar for the last few years, ever since it was announced in a world premiere trailer debut at the Game Awards in 2020. I watched the show with my team, and the second the trailer started, I was convinced that this was the great return of Dead Space. I was immediately swept away by the creepy spaceship vibes and the looming sense of dread. And of course, the idea of getting jump scared by a disgusting flesh monster was more than enough to get me hyped on this upcoming new IP. From this point forward, I actually avoided any and all press things that I could about the Callisto Protocol, because I knew in my bones that I would walk away from it feeling very excited and very pumped. Even though this ended up being revealed as a new title, I was all in. The pedigree alone of the creatives involved had my interest piqued. The Callisto Protocol's announcement felt like a spotlight beaming into my life to light up what I've been missing for so many years. A third-person over-the-shoulder survival horror game where a working-class basic dude is thrust into a terrifying situation where he's in way over his head in space. Truly visceral combat with genuinely disgusting death animations all over the place. Monsters that make my stomach lurch. Fixing doors, trains, and other space station ephemera as an ally tells me where to go from a control room? Big Boo go stomp? Yeah, I've been here before, and I, for one, am very happy to be back. The premise is very reminiscent of Alien or Event Horizon or any number of science fiction horror masterpieces. You play as Jacob Lee, who is played by the awesome Josh Duhamel, a freelancer and contractor who transports dangerous cargo wherever it needs to go. After Jacob and his co-pilot Max decide to finish that one last job and transport some mysterious special cargo, their ship is boarded by the Outer Way, a terrorist organization who's been staging raids all over the galaxy. Jacob manages to vent most of the Outer Way thugs out of an airlock, but not without casualties, as their leader Danny causes some damage to the ship. Jacob is then forced to crash land on one of the moons of Jupiter, Callisto, where he happens to be doing a majority of these cargo runs to anyways. When Jacob comes to, he realizes that his friend Max is dead, but can't think about it for very long because he then is arrested by the sadistic Captain Ferris alongside Danny, seemingly without cause, and is then taken into prison. But the nightmare is just beginning, as almost immediately after intake, all hell breaks loose on Black Iron Prison. Some sort of viral outbreak spreads throughout the facility, turning everyone into terrifying mutant zombie type characters. With the help of a few unlikely allies, Jacob's goal is to escape Callisto alive and to maybe solve the mystery of how things got so bad so quickly. Okay, so it's a straightforward plot for what I expected to be a straightforward game. I anticipated a fairly linear adventure that leans very heavily into production design and mood setting. The Callisto Protocol, in the various revealed trailers and the lead up to the game's release, pushes the limits of the available technology to create some truly unsettling moments. And yes, if you think, oh hey, this game reminds you of something that seems familiar, a lot of the UI and other design elements are heavily influenced by game director Glenn Schofield's previous efforts in Dead Space. But I went into this game hoping that the Callisto Protocol would not just be a Dead Space clone or just a redone version of Dead Space. As much as I love Dead Space, the upcoming remake will hopefully satiate the desire to experience that exact title from a fresh perspective. The game looks to be doing its own thing, featuring some unique combat mechanics and interesting twists on collectibles and progression. Now, a little behind the scenes peek for you all here. I received the game key for Callisto Protocol late this most recent Monday afternoon, meaning that I have had less than 120 hours to complete this game, write the script, produce the episode, and edit the episode almost by myself. Now, I'm hoping there won't be any errors or day one patches that completely make me look like a gigantic fool here, but we are running full speed on this video, which was necessary because I also had no information about how long it would take to complete it, or if there would be anything that was particularly challenging to overcome in my experience. These days, I'm lucky if I get to review a game the first day it releases, so I feel very fortunate to have been on the short list of reviewers and outlets chosen to play the Callisto Protocol early. But the double-edged sword here also means that I have no idea what completion looks like. Based off of the 27 trophies on the PlayStation 5, I can reasonably assume that a good chunk of those are story related and pop after reaching certain chapters. The rest are seemingly related to performing certain in-game feats or combat missions, finding certain collectibles, or even secret rooms. Now, not to keep bringing up the elephant in the room here, but the original Dead Space is about a 12 to 15 hour linear story experience, with Completionists kind of sticking around that and above, depending on your own skill level. So I imagine Callisto will be on par with that. I anticipate that this may be taking me a little bit longer to complete, since I am sailing in uncharted waters here, and I'm not sure what the devs are expecting of Completionists. Now, there are 3 difficulty levels for the game, but since I've been playing many difficult games lately, and for fear that there may be a hidden higher difficulty level to unlock after clearing the game on the highest difficulty, I felt comfortable setting my file to maximum security security, this game's version of hard mode right out the gate. As far as things to do beyond survive and smash mutants, there are weapons and gear to upgrade, and certainly audio logs and other collectibles to find. But I'm confident that most folks will be able to 100% this game in one playthrough. And though developer Striking Distance Studios has promised an even harder difficulty mode later on, as well as New Game Plus options in a future update, the release version of the game promises to be a fairly no-nonsense completion process, I think. Completing the Callisto Protocol has been something I've looked forward to all year long, especially as an admirer of what the creatives have worked on in the past. That said, what I expected from completing the Callisto Protocol did not always align with what actually went down. The Callisto Protocol starts off as a thrill ride, with the player being pulled from one high-stakes situation to the next. It is carried in large by strong performances by the game's lead characters, visually stunning graphics and audio design, and by very striking world building. In its opening chapters in the first few hours of gameplay, I thought this just might be the successor I had been hoping and waiting for. But once that initial sheen wore off and I started to drill down into fully completing everything, what I was left with was a game that just felt fine. Just felt fine. It was okay. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was fine. In fairness, the first quarter or third of the game is very, very solid. The world is cool. It feels very lived in, even in the opening moments between Jacob and Max. These guys just want to live comfortable lives. And if that means smuggling some questionable cargo from time to time, they'll do so. There are elements of a bleak dystopian future, particularly in the introduction to Black Iron Prison and how it treats its inmates. I appreciated the brief glimpse we get of a future city in this world in the very first opening cutscene. Neon signs advertising 1-hour implants in what feels like a rundown red light district. The moon of Callisto itself is pretty well characterized, a hostile place where only the toughest and meanest can hope to survive. The baddest dude on the moon is undoubtedly Captain Ferris, played with cold, calculated menace by the awesome Sam Witwer. Ferris is hard as hell and genuinely cruel, projecting his sadism onto every guard and inmate under him. But every character in the Callisto Protocol is tough. Jacob, performed by Josh Duhamel, is a survivor who will do whatever it takes to make it out of Black Iron Prison alive. And Karen Fukuhara as his uneasy companion, Danny Nakamura, is a great fit, bringing all her intensity from the boys to bear here. But all that world building and performance capture takes a back seat to the main mechanics. The Callisto Protocol is at its heart a third-person horror game where terrifying monsters burst out of vents and try to rip the player apart. Sounds great, right? You have to kill a lot of monsters in Callisto, and this game's approach to combat is, well, absolutely wild. There is no better way to phrase this, and I've talked about this a lot with a lot of my YouTube friends. The combat in Callisto Protocol is Dead Space meets Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! The Sphere Hunter and I talked about this quite a bit. Rather than using mining tools to slice limbs off of monsters, most combat involves dodging enemy attacks and following up with a melee strike of your own. Now, this is fun and exciting at first, but I was shocked to discover that this is most of the combat in the game. Yes, you eventually find some conventional weaponry like a pistol, assault rifle, a shotgun, a riot gun, but to succeed in the Callisto Protocol and to even have a chance at completing it on its hardest setting, you're going to need to master this extremely strange combat system that asks players to hold the left stick to dodge in one direction, then dodge immediately to the right in the other direction, and to follow up with a couple of smacks of the police baton or pickaxe or tool or whatever you've got on you. Seriously, that is the bulk of every combat encounter. Dodge left, dodge right, hit, hit, hit. Dodge right, dodge left, hit, hit, hit. Enemy goes down, stomp on their body to find some credits or health, and repeat. The game emphasizes there is no real timing window, so dodging never feels like something that requires much skill. And the only thing to keep in mind is not to dodge in the same direction twice in a row, or you'll fail the sequence and get got. And here's the thing, and I can't believe I'm telling you all at home so you can make fun of me for the next several years. At first, I felt like an idiot. Hell, talking about it right now, I still feel like an idiot. I haven't slept, so I'm sure that's probably why. I kid you not, I spent 1 hour of playtime just learning how to dodge. Just sitting there, grinding it out and learning. The instructions in the beginning of the game are clear. but the instance at which they show you how to dodge is more like a cinematic cutscene than the actual gameplay itself. So I was a bit confused. Does it matter what hand they hit me with? Should I let go of dodging in between strikes? There's an achievement for getting perfect dodges. What's a perfect dodge? How do you perform it? How is it different than the established dodge mechanic in the game? All of these dumb questions I had in my mind, I answered myself by practicing for this 1 hour. Perfect dodging seems to be a last minute time press that's perfect, and it's just really cool looking. Since I was playing on the hardest setting, I'm glad I did this, because in the end, all that mattered was hold left, hold right, then strike when they're not striking, repeat. Because I played on hard mode, I couldn't really afford to take more than a couple of hits, especially because you do not get any form of suit upgrade for several chapters in. I genuinely did not expect combat to shake out like this does. There's a combo you unlock early on where, after dodging a few attacks and walloping an enemy with your melee attack, you can press the left trigger to quickly lock onto them and fire a shot from your gun. Now, this is a very satisfying move to pull off the first few times. Once it clicks, I appreciated what the game was trying to do. Hey, there's a reason Punch-Out is a classic game, and blending it with jump scare flesh zombies is a novel twist. But I was shocked to learn over the course of the game that the combat doesn't ever really grow beyond this for the majority of encounters. As interesting as this combat system is at the very beginning of the game, after completing the Callisto Protocol, I found myself feeling dissatisfied with the lack of variety over time. And that includes enemy varieties as well. You get new guns throughout the game, and even those new items feel like they mattered very little to the progression of the combat. I know I've said this a bunch before, but comparisons to Dead Space are inevitable. I do think it's also worth mentioning, though, that I've been playing a ton of God of War Ragnarok right before getting my hands on Callisto. Obviously, Callisto Protocol and Ragnarok are extremely different games from separate genres, separate worlds. The variety and fluidity of combat on display in Ragnarok is striking when compared to this game. In Ragnarok, I wanted to master every system at hand to complete more intricate challenges. In the Callisto Protocol, what you see in the first chapter or two is more or less what you get in terms of combat, and that will be either enough to sustain you or turn you off of the experience entirely. Jacob eventually finds his way to a grip, a cool glove that the prison guards use to subdue inmates. The grip does add a little bit more complexity to combat encounters, but not as much as you'd might have hoped for. You can use the grip to chuck smaller enemies into walls or big spinning fans, which is always badass. But at the end of the day, Callisto Protocol is ruled by its melee and dodging systems. That is, until the back half of the game, which throws almost everything that I've been perfecting up until that point. But more on that in just a bit. It's kind of bananas how much combat falls apart when there are more than, let's say, 2 enemies on screen. Dodging a single zombie guard in a narrow hallway as the music is pounding and the lights are flickering? Tense, scary, fun. Trying to do the same thing when there's a ranged attacker flinging green globs at you from across the way and an unseen third enemy appears behind you with little to no indication of that, then getting killed and being sent back to a checkpoint that's somewhat far away? Extremely deflating. Unfortunately, the further you progress in the game, the more this seems to be the norm, until the Callisto Protocol takes a hard left turn into something else entirely. Early on, there are some light stealth elements introduced. Jacob has to sneak past some big bad robots who can rip him apart or shoot him dead without much effort. You can crouch and move past them no problem, and eventually learn that by sneaking up on certain fleshy enemies, you can shiv them right in the brain using a sharpened wrench. Slotting in a stealth section here or there is one thing, but after a certain point about halfway through the game, this starts to really rely on stealth to an extreme detriment. This might be because the Callisto Protocol lacks some movement options that would make things feel so much better. Jacob's walking speed is so slow. Even his run never amounts to more than a light jog. My dude, there are things coming after you. Run your ass off. Factor in that there's no quick turn, and that means that the stealth sections can break bad really quickly if you're spotted, since there is no way to re-enter stealth. And on hard mode, that's essentially a death sentence. This would not be an issue if these encounters weren't as frequent in the latter half, or if restarting an encounter was faster overall. But you can't skip deaths or cutscenes. As it stands, I find the stealth to not be well thought out towards the end of the game. There's this theory when developing stealth games that the stealth can only be fun or rewarding if the player has options when the silent approach fails. That theory doesn't really apply here. You you get caught in a stealth area, you're essentially done, and you might lose a bunch of progress too. There is also a distinct and noticeable lack of boss enemies until the very end of the game, which is not a deal breaker, but it is a surprise. I guess a big boss monster wouldn't really gel with the dodging / melee system they've established here, and yet they tried with a double whammy of disappointment in the form of Two-Head and Captain Ferris. Now, let's start with Two-Head. Two-Head is kind of like a mini boss who shows up in the later part of the game. The first encounter is right after a super long stealth section. Just when I was starting to wonder why the game had placed so much emphasis on stealth for the last hour, this big double-headed monstrosity showed up to complicate things. Now, it is a decent change of pace, but like the stealth elements, this fight totally undercuts everything the game has taught me thus far, because this is an ammo-intensive fight. If you're the kind of person who didn't save enough ammo for the fight, you're in big trouble here. If you try to swing your baton at any instance and connect with Two-Head, Two-Head can retaliate and instantly kill you. You've got to blast Two-Head down until it falls to its knees, run up, and crack him over the dome several times. It then removes one of its heads and doubles up its strength and health, and the fight continues. It's actually a pretty easy fight, but you need ammo to get through it, and you need to keep that in mind because you fight this guy nearly 4 more times on the way back to the end of the game. It's kind of bullet spongy. Just need to make sure you don't get grabbed and wrecked. This first encounter is fun to learn and to figure out, and it's rad and gruesome that it rips off a part of its own body to fight you. That's extremely sick. But having to do the same fight multiple times in such a short span feels a little overkill. Now, the real endgame boss fight against the nefarious Captain Ferris is a frustrating mess. I have been taught the whole game to dodge left, dodge right, attack, attack, attack. But for some reason in this battle, the dodging is taken away or is completely changed or just doesn't work anymore. I couldn't quite figure it out. Was my game bugged? Did this battle against Ferris shift the mechanics in some special way that I missed a prompt or tutorial to figure out why? This was a battle that should only take a couple of minutes to figure out, but I spent an hour and 15 minutes just relearning how to dodge and not get killed in 2 hits. Ultimately, what it felt like it came down to was pure RNG. That's how it felt. I'm not saying that's what it was. That's what it felt like. I felt like I got an A on a test after taking the same test 300 times in a row, knowing all of the answers, and the teacher just said, "Yeah, sure, you did great, kid, here you go." His second form, of course, because you have to have one at the very end of the game, was comparatively simple to defeat, but this first phase made me question everything I had been doing up to this point in the game. Maxing out the riot gun was the best way to deal enough damage to finally defeat Ferris, but this was the only weapon that I felt was truly worth it to fully upgrade. Its alternate fire takes 4 shots of its rounds and turns it into a grenade-like explosive. So the key to my successful RNG was shoot grenades as fast as I can before the amazing Sam Witwer me up. And you know what? Great motivation if you ask me. Every so often, Jacob comes across a Reforge, which is a 3D printer that is used to improve weapons using Callisto credits. The upgrades are useful, do not get me wrong, but resources are so scarce that I was only ever able to make small improvements at a time. Jacob's inventory is really small starting out, only 6 slots for something like half of the game, so hoarding valuable objects to sell becomes difficult to do. In fact, inventory management is baffling in the Callisto Protocol. It is a noticeable step back from what Dead Space and even what newer Resident Evil titles have been establishing. Look, I know survival horror is survival horror, but it really went back to the original Resident Evil in terms of inventory management from the start. Ammo for all the different guns do stack on each other in the inventory, but that's it. Health injectors, sellable loot, or batteries do not stack. So you'll find yourself prioritizing how to get the most bang for your buck, considering that money is already a scarce resource in the game. Now, I do understand the reasoning here. Maybe the devs wanted to place an emphasis on scarcity to pump up that survival horror aspect. But since the Callisto Protocol never feels all that scary to begin with, I found myself more frustrated than tense. This also extends to the gruesome and over-the-top death animations. Look, I fully expect a game about space zombies to be gnarly and violent, and I can certainly relish a good fatality or two. But I was genuinely put off when I died and Jacob's entire jaw was yanked from his face, or the top of his skull being ripped off, exposing his bloody brain. it's a little much. It's less scary than it is gross, and not in a fun scorn body horror kind of way, just in a how far can we push things and still feature jump scares kind of capacity. All that to say, I was underwhelmed by the combat here, particularly when I was presented with stealth sections. But there's more to it than just that. The more time I spent completing the Callisto Protocol, the more mixed I felt about the whole bizarre experience. I can move past lackluster combat if there are enough other elements to wow me, but that's not quite the case. Beyond progressing the story and surviving combat encounters, there are two main collectibles to find and interact with: audio logs and transplant cores. As far as servicing the plot and overall world building, these are fine and serve their purpose well. I do think it's weird that you can't listen to the audio logs while you progress in the game. You actually have to stop and pull out the menu to listen to them. But in terms of actually finding the logs and transplant rigs, they became the bane of my existence due to some deep structural flaws at the heart of this game. All right, here we go. So the Callisto Protocol is broken up into chapters. However, there is no chapter select available even when you beat the game. And this becomes a massive problem with how this game approaches collectibles. The unfortunate reality is, if you miss a collectible and move on from the chapter, you cannot complete the game. Otherwise, you'd have to revert back to previous saves, get the collectible, and then slowly work your way through the game, like I did. Now, I said this before, but the Callisto Protocol is a linear game. What I failed to underestimate was how linear it was. What I didn't expect was hidden secrets and items with very little places to look and search for them all, only to be shown an even more linear experience than what I was actually getting. So if I finished an area without finding all the audio logs or transplant rigs, I couldn't always just go back and retrace my steps. It would lock me out. If I missed something, I pretty much had to restart the entire chapter, prompting me to make multiple saves every time I would hit a checkpoint. And if this sounds like a rough time to you, yeah, it was. And wouldn't you know it, I had to do this multiple times. There are some chapters I had to replay something around 4 to 6 times, playing through as thoroughly as possible to scrub every corner for collectibles. Oftentimes, I had to rewatch long cutscenes because there was no way to skip them. Cutscenes themselves are fine, performances are believable and engaging, and the writing is pretty strong all around, even if the overall plot is not as strong as it could be. But I would have liked to at least have the option to skip past stuff I've already seen. After replaying the Lost chapter for the 3rd time in a row, I started to crack a little bit. Now, I'm a very careful player when it comes to finding collectibles. I feel like I have a pretty great mental map for finding hidden objects, but this game very nearly broke me due to a couple of factors. There is no way to track collectibles in this game outside of knowing that there are a certain amount per chapter based on the silhouettes of the characters of interest that you have yet found. Now, this feels intentional, and I don't necessarily fault the developers for this, as they clearly wanted the game to feel as immersive as possible. And to that end, they did a phenomenal job. But the impact it has on me as a completionist was debilitating. Because everything in the Callisto Protocol is rendered so beautifully, I had an extremely difficult time discerning which areas and objects I was able to interact with and which were just set dressing pieces. There were genuinely moments where I had no idea where to go or what to do next because I couldn't distinguish what pieces of architecture I could mantle over. Because after spending hours and hours replaying just one stage with a ton of slow-paced stealth sections, I was damn near ready to give up on finding that last missing core transplant. There was a whole other problem I had in one stage where I got a collectible and a checkpoint, walked a few feet, got killed instantly, would load back at the checkpoint, the collectible was gone, and the game said I did not have the collectible, meaning I had to start the whole chapter over again. I will say that playing on the PlayStation 5, I avoided some issues that seem to be plaguing PC players right now. It ran pretty smoothly, even if I did have these unfortunate bugs here and there. Now, obviously, I don't expect a brand new game from a newer studio that I'm currently completing before it is even launched to have zero technical flaws. But combined with those issues previously mentioned, missing a collectible due to something out of my control and being unable to figure out why is a massive downer. Aside from being the completionist, why were these audio logs and transplant rigs so important? Because they are required for a trophy. You can hopefully see why I slowly went mad considering the deadline I've been on these last few days. Glitches like this and attempting to overcome them can really overshadow the strengths of the rest of the game. I went into Callisto Protocol expecting to fall in love again and again, and to be frank, I kind of did. It's not love, it's more like I like you, but don't like you, the Callisto Protocol, you know? But this is a game that is confused about what it wants to be. I like the world striking distance created, even if it is packed with cliches. Mad scientist doctors? Check. Power tripping prison warden who is convinced he's doing things for the greater good? Check. Allies who don't trust each other but who come together to overcome their mutual distrust? Yes. Right here. But I took these things in stride because the presentation is really strong and I found the performances and setting just charismatic and intriguing enough to keep me moving forward. But completing this game is a tall, weird order, especially when there isn't much satisfaction to be found at the end of this blood-trailed finish line. At the very least, I can take pride in that I beat the game on the hardest setting, got the platinum, and no one can take that away from me, right? Wait, what? What did Greg Miller just tweet? Are you kidding me? I beat this game on the hardest setting, and you tell me that I can just boot up the game and change the difficulty and still get the trophy? Are you kidding me? Oh my God! So now, I have sprinted through the Callisto Protocol in just a couple of days, and I made it all the way to its bloody end, and I am left with mixed feelings and a drained mind and empty heart. There are some fantastic moments that had me on the edge of my seat, but a lot more moments that had me shaking with frustration. Some design choices felt genuinely out of place in this modern landscape. At the end of the day, as someone who has completed this game in less than a week, wrote a 22-page script, edited and produced the whole episode, streamed the process of it all, and is finally here to show you the video, I think I can confidently say the Callisto Protocol is a disappointment. Having played through the game on maximum security, there is no reward for having done so other than a single trophy. This game currently lacks a New Game Plus feature coming out in the future, meaning that maxing out every weapon for now to use again in a new playthrough is more or less impossible. And knowing what I know now about essentially skipping the difficulty in the last scene of the game, well, enjoy your platinum, everyone. There are no meaningful choices to be made, nor any nuance to be gained from additional scrutiny of the plot. I didn't talk about puzzles because there aren't any puzzles in the game. I didn't feel compelled to impose any additional restrictions on myself or to push the game to its limits by only using certain weapons or the like. Aside from the trophy list, there truly is no great reward for scouring every chapter for every collectible. This is a shame to me, and I say that as someone who is drawn into Callisto's fairly bombastic and compelling opening chapters. All told, I blitzed through the 8 chapters of the Callisto Protocol in about 20 hours of total playtime. The game was really done in about 10 hours, but with all the extra backtracking, glitches, problems, crashes, it added an additional 10. I died countless times, especially in the final fight against the mutated Captain Ferris. I had to reload checkpoints in at least 10 separate instances and replayed 3 chapters more than 3 times each in an effort to find all 43 audio logs and core implants. Earning all 27 trophies never quite hit the sweet spot of feeling very satisfying, but I guess it was better than nothing. Which I suppose is where I land on the Callisto Protocol in summation. I'm glad to have played it, and I'd happily see what comes next from Striking Distance. But I don't think this title will have the lasting impact of its predecessors.
I think the legacy of the Callisto Protocol is going to come down to what happens with this IP in the future. It's a perfectly serviceable adventure with some great high points, solid performances, and an interesting world that's set before us. But really, if you're comparing this game to the series that inspired it, it falls pretty short. It's not Dead Space, it's less space. If Callisto turns out to be the beginning of a franchise, then I'd say it's a great first step, and that follow-up needs to kick it into high gear. And you know what? Maybe I had too high of expectations or placed too much pressure on what is realistically a solid linear game. And hey, maybe the promised upcoming content patches will give me a reason to return, because this is a decently solid foundation set in a relatively cool world. I give this game my completionist rating of play it, and I mean it. If you're a fan of the genre, and you haven't played Dead Space in a bit and want something that feels familiar but still has its own voice, you'll definitely get something out of this whole experience. Thank you for watching and listening to my unfiltered thoughts. And now, I am going to marathon what I call sleep. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Play it!